Welcome back to the Crimson Chat, your go-to show for the most inspiring stories straight from the heart of the University of Kansas. I'm your host, Jaden Hill, and today we're diving into the fascinating world of chemistry, where molecules, minerals, and energy come together to tackle some of society's most pressing challenges. Our guest, Dr. James Blakemore, Associate Professor, and Keith D. Wilner Chair in Chemistry here at KU. Dr. Blakemore's research spans from designing new catalysts for clean fuel to studying how metals, including those central to nuclear chemistry, can unlock safer and more efficient energy solutions. His work bridges fundamental science and global challenges in energy production. Dr. Blakemore, welcome to the Crimson Chat.
Thank you so much for having me, Jade.
Absolutely. And to kick things off, I just want to know, how did you originally get interested in chemistry and the work that you do?
Yeah. So what I'll open with is that when I was a young person, a student, I wasn't particularly interested in chemistry. A lot of chemists love to light things on fire as kids, or go out and play in the garden and find colors. I was sort of an indoor person. But when I was in high school, I had a very engaging teacher, and then declared a chemistry major in college because it seemed practical and I could get a job in it. And I think the central moment that drew me to working on energy issues was I was in a research lab at my alma mater, which is Wichita State here in Kansas, and there was a poster up on the wall that had a picture of a solar panel and different chemical structures. And then suddenly I realized that chemistry, which a lot of people might think goes in directions like human health and becoming a doctor, also had this energy aspect. And then that drew me to start reading more about pollution and how we get our energy in society. And I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. You had an engaging high school teacher, and you got interested in it. And most people, their involvement with chemistry ends at probably their junior, senior year, whenever they take that class. What are some misconceptions about chemistry you think people have?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think I'll start with one way that I encapsulate chemistry, which is that doing chemistry is a lot like learning a language. That our students and I, in my education, went through and learned about all these building blocks around us that are sort of the words and vocabulary and grammar of foreign language. And once you know how to speak the language, you can start writing poetry or writing prose and doing projects, reaching out in the world and saying, what is in this container? How can I transform it? How can I use it? There's no doubt chemistry has a terrible reputation. And all I can say is I think that just like not everyone can learn Spanish or Chinese, there's certain ways of thinking and what minds that people have that make them open to being chemists. And I just happen to be one of those, and it's to my great surprise.
Well, that's amazing, and you're doing amazing work. And you've had a really interesting journey. You touched on this. You started off at Wichita State, but you've been all the way from Yale to Caltech to now here. What did each part of those areas in your journey, what did they represent? What did they lead you to? Why are they important?
Absolutely. So, all right. So, let's see. It would have been about 2006 at Wichita State. I was trucking along. I was studying chemistry and then also foreign language, Spanish and Russian. And I had a very engaging research mentor who pushed me to think about going to grad school because it was becoming very clear that chemistry was my first skill. It was what I thought about at night. So it was a natural career choice. But I think I just didn't see myself in a way that I could go and get a PhD. That seemed so lofty. But I ended up applying to various schools, and the place that fit just from the moment I walked on campus was Yale University, which is an Ivy League institution in Connecticut. And frankly, I was a Kansas boy. I couldn't have pointed at Connecticut on a map, but it's over by New York, Long Island, on Long Island Sound. And walked on campus, very young person, not knowing what I wanted to do in chemistry. And I met several faculty, including Professor Bob Crabtree and Professor Gary Brudvig, who had long been collaborating on certain issues in using metals to solve problems in energy. And I got started, joined their group, and was actually collaboratively advised by both of them, drawing from both of their expertise. It probably would be interesting to mention that Professor Crabtree is very much a specialist in artificial systems, so like designing new catalysts and new materials that don't exist naturally on Earth. Whereas Professor Brudvig is an expert in studying how plants make oxygen, which is very much part of the energy cycle on our planet, and of course has yielded the oxygen we breathe. And so those two things, knowledge of artificial systems and being inspired by nature, threads that came together for me when I was at Yale. And we have met some success in designing catalysts for oxygen evolution, so mimicking plants. And then on the strength of that, I went and took up a temporary position called a postdoctoral scholar position at the California Institute of Technology. And the person I worked with there is named Professor Harry Gray, and he's a wonderful mentor and supporter and has had a long and illustrious career in inorganic chemistry. And it was when I was there that I turned my attention, rather than oxidizing reactions, I learned about reducing reactions, the two sides of the coin now, the other side of the coin of how to do energy, to approach energy issues. And then I was there for 3.5 years and applied to around 50 schools across the country for a faculty position. And KU was the one that was, as one of my colleagues says, it was sort of love at first sight. And now I've been here for almost 10 years.
That's wonderful. And I love seeing how each part of your journey kind of led you to where you are now and the research you do. But for those of us who aren't chemists, myself included, can you explain what you do with your research and what you're working on right now?
Oh, that's a big question. I think the way I'll describe it is that my team of students and I over in Gray Little Hall have a laboratory full of equipment that allows us to generate new, very special chemical compounds that can teach us lessons about energy. And so my students, I'm so impressed with them every day because they are trying to put substances in bottles and make samples we can study that are chemical compounds that have never been made before. They're brand new, to quote a book I recently read, they're free creations of the human mind. And we, just like an artist paints, my students and I assemble through chemical synthesis new metal-containing molecules that can teach us. Most recently, we're focusing a lot, as you said, on nuclear energy. So the chemistry of uranium and other heavy elements. But then we make these compounds and then we study their properties to try to learn things that can help us, as an example, clean up the nuclear fuel cycle, deal with used nuclear fuel, aka nuclear waste.
That's what I was going to say. So let's talk about nuclear fuel. What is it? Why do you use it? Good, bad? Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So here in Kansas, we have a pressurized water reactor nuclear power plant. It's called Wolf Creek. You can look up its website. That facility uses a form of uranium to generate heat that boils water that turns a turbine that makes electricity. And remarkably, from a variety of perspectives, that power plant, Wolf Creek, has never emitted pollution in the time that it has been operating. Now, yes, in the reactor, uranium undergoes a process of nuclear fission, which generates components in the fuel that are sort of trapped in the fuel rods that are very dangerous. And they have to be handled carefully and shielded because of radioactivity concerns. But remarkably, all of the fuel that has ever been used at Wolf Creek to generate electricity is still at Wolf Creek. It's in a cooling water pool or in specialized storage containers. And there is an opportunity to make nuclear energy cleaner, to chemically take apart that used fuel, get the useful stuff out, and then the very dangerous small fraction that needs to be permanently disposed of, put that in a small container where it can be disposed of.
And where do you dispose of it? Because it's really dangerous. I mean, is there just this massive waste site, or?
Yeah. So right now, incredibly, in this country, partly because of a lack of agreement of how to deal with the used fuel, it is used fuel from commercial power reactors tends to be stored at the power plant. When the plants were originally built, they were built with a certain amount of storage space that corresponded to the amount of fuel that would be used in that plant over its original rated lifetime. But thanks to human ingenuity, it turns out these plants have longer lifetimes than we thought in the mid-20th century when they were built. And so now we're building up more fuel beyond what fits in these cooling water pools where the fuel is kept. And so now it just continues to build up. Eventually, I can say I'm of the viewpoint that eventually we're going to have to come up with a permanent disposal solution. And this is done in different ways in different countries. One way that it could be dealt with is through deep geologic repository, deep underground spaces where we would put the most dangerous and say useless components that come out of the reactors.
Yeah, and I want to get a little bit more technical. In some of your work, you talk about molecular electrocatalysts.
Yes.
What is that, and why is it important?
Yeah, well, I think on the nuclear dimension, getting into a little more technical language, as I mentioned, oxidation and reduction. So oxidation and reduction are types of reactions that convert metals or materials between different forms that we call oxidation states.
So would this kind of be like when we think about the Statue of Liberty and it oxidizes?
Exactly,
is it like that?
Exactly.
Okay, perfect.
So copper, metal is sort of a metallic color, that sort of tan color. And then when it oxidizes, we get that greenish patina of oxidized copper. Where in Kansas, a lot of people have fences that are made of iron. You can take iron metal and then it rusts to that powdery substance that eventually we have to, take care of. So all metals can undergo those sorts of redox reactions. And in my research lately, we've been using our expertise in oxidation state changes to look at nuclear fuel materials and their oxidation state changes. And that is both what we call a front-end issue of the fuel cycle and also a back-end issue. Because on the front end, we have to do a process called enrichment to take standard uranium to the form that works in a reactor. And then on the back end, we have to use oxidation state changes, most likely, to separate materials from the nuclear fuel that's been used. And both of those require approaching these difficult redox reactions. And so that is really the heart of our research right now, is looking at how to control metals oxidation states, particularly uranium, but also more exotic elements that you might have heard of less frequently, like neptunium and plutonium, which are essentially man-made elements that didn't exist on Earth until we created them in nuclear reactors. And they have their own chemistry, just like uranium. It's just that the quantities we have to study are much less. And so it's a specialized thing. Yeah.
And so with what you're doing, it connects to nuclear fuel, as we've talked about. How does that connect to the average person's life? Like, when are they using nuclear fuel, or how are they using it? And how does your work play into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably everyone listening to this program looks at the news headlines and sees that there's a lot of talk about the electricity needs for data centers, for AI, for example. And our society needs clean energy sources. Nuclear power is viewed as attractive for a number of reasons. One is that it does not emit carbon dioxide when it's being used. And another is that when you turn on a nuclear power plant, once it's loaded with fuel, it will generate electricity continuously. Solar panels, wind power are intermittent energy sources. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. And so as we transition away, hopefully, from fossil fuels that are very much sending out lots of CO2 and other serious pollutants, nuclear is viewed as a possible component of our future energy system. And that means that all of the issues I mentioned with fuel and how we get it and how we process it and deal with it after we're done with it will just grow to be even bigger problems in the future.
It's really super important. I love that you brought the AI component, because that's a huge part of that conversation right now. Not just on the educational side and people being concerned about atrophy of the brain and all of that, but the genuine, impact on the environment.
Yes.
And is that a real scare? Like, is it using that much energy?
Yeah.
The AI systems, do you know?
What I can say is that I follow the news. I mean, of course, I'm not building data centers, but it is certainly predicted that the need for computing power is going to grow greatly in the years ahead. And artificial intelligence and other new technologies are viewed as driving that need for electrical energy to power those data centers, to power the computers, so that when I type into Google, what's the molecular weight of uranium compound X, Chat GPT or one of these programs can just whip through a English language answer. That does take energy. And also the population of the Earth is growing. The energy problem is not going away. Yeah.
And so nuclear fuel, could that be used for a possible AI center to fuel that?
Yes, in fact, if you read the headlines, it's so dramatic. The U.S. government's Department of Energy is actually discussing building new nuclear power plants co-localized with new data centers on federally owned land in some cases. And what I can tell you is that we have not had a huge amount of development of new nuclear energy in this country in the last 30 years, let's say. And so it would be an incredible sea change and an incredible technical challenge to build these new plants and to deal with everything that comes with them. So those are very dramatic headlines to me, and I am not 100% sure whether we're ready to do that. Of course, there are a lot of things changing in our government right now, but whether the technical basis is there to do it is unclear. And of course, the waste problem, again, I'll just emphasize, right now, any fuel we used at those sites would just simply stay on site. I think I can say that broad stroke, yeah.
So then the other concern may be the health side of it, right? Is there concern for people living around a nuclear
as I said,
plant?
To a first approximation, there's no significant pollution, radioactive or otherwise, that comes from a nuclear power plant. However, the material that is kept there in those storage areas does present a variety of hazards and risks. And so, as a U.S. citizen, I would encourage my government not to rush headlong into changes to the way we deal with that. And as someone working in the area, I'm hoping that our basic science will help us to clean up those issues around the spent fuel.
And what does nuclear power plants look like globally? I mean, I assume the U.S. isn't the only one who's doing this. You talked about other countries are looking at different ways to dispose of waste. So globally, what does this look like?
Yeah, I think the first and one country that I view with some admiration is France. It turns out that due to various geopolitical factors from the 20th century and also the materials they have in France, they made a decision to go big on nuclear in the mid-20th century. And France's electricity grid, for example, is over 85% nuclearized. So the carbon footprint of electricity in France is very low. And they have a fuel cycle where they do the chemistry I'm describing. They have a version of the oxidation state changes needed to pull the fuel apart and make, essentially recycle the fuel. They can take the uranium through the reactor once, take a small component out that's dangerous, and then bring it back to the beginning and use it very efficiently. The other vignette I'll highlight, so that's very commendable for France. The other vignette I'll highlight is in China. There are many nuclear plants under development. And if there is a race to develop the next generation of nuclear technology, at least in terms of deployment, China appears to be moving ahead at a brisk clip.
Yeah. And again, going back a little bit more technical, so we're talking about transition metals and even F-block elements. Can you describe what exactly a transition metal and an F-block?
Oh, sure.
What does that all look like? Because again, I took high school chemistry. I didn't go much past that.
Of course. So the periodic table is the list of all the elements that we have on Earth to do chemistry with, and some that we don't have naturally on Earth, as I said. So transition metals are the conventional metals that you might think of in coins. So, or the wiring in your house. So nickel, copper, the catalytic converter, if you have a gasoline-powered car, has platinum and rhodium in it. These are all transition metals. In my research group, one of the facets that you're getting at with your question is that we make chemical compounds that pair transition metals, like nickel, with elements like uranium that are in the nuclear fuel cycle. And what we're trying to do in that work is use the chemistry that we know well from catalyst development with nickel or vanadium or platinum, and then put that atom near to uranium and see how the interactions between those two can change the properties of uranium. Essentially, as chemists, we would like to be able, essentially, to control the uranium chemistry, to say, okay, if I put uranium into this environment, I'll change its form so that it changes its solubility in this direction, and that's in the fuel cycle, because now if I could just tickle uranium in the right way, I would coax it so that it would just come over into the place in the system where I want it so that I can separate it. And the way my group does that is by putting multiple metals together to get special interactions that are otherwise inaccessible.
And is there anything else about your research that you think is really important for our listeners to know, or maybe other facets of research you've done not connected to nuclear fuel?
I think what I'll come back to is I mentioned I work with a team of incredible students. And what I would say is in the nearly 10 years I've been at KU, something that has repeatedly brought students into my office to talk to me is the concerns they have about our environment and how our energy sources interact with the environment, and then wanting to use their interest in chemistry to do something in that area. And I think that there can sometimes be pessimism about the environment and pessimism about where we're headed in our society. But what I can tell you is over in Gray Little Hall and in universities across the country, there are some really talented young scientists trying to work on these tough challenges. Guess what? It's hard to clean up nuclear waste. And we're just working on one small facet, luckily with support from the government, to try to learn lessons to do that. And from what I can see, there's no slowdown in students and young people who are interested in these difficult energy issues.
As I'm sure my listeners and I can tell already, you are a fabulous mentor, and you've received many mentorship awards. What is your approach to mentoring students?
What I would say is that what I try to do is meet students wherever they are. every one of those graduate students and undergraduates on my research team is a unique person, and they have their own unique skills. Sometimes they have areas they need to improve in, and they also have things that they love and care about. And when I am able to connect what they love and they might be good at with something that can speak to a real research need, that's where the one way to say it is that the research and the team starts to operate at multiple levels of harmony, because they get excited and they want to come in and work hard. They know that I'll be there to help them when they inevitably face challenges. And so I would say it's a personalized approach. And also the other aspect I would say is it's so important to have your eyes open in science and sort of be ready to see the opportunity. And there's no doubt that about 8 years ago, I saw an opportunity in this idea of bringing two metals together to work on nuclear issues. And the research really took off. And that's helped me bring in the students, and so it's been very fun.
And what advice do you give students, or would you give students who are interested in pursuing a career in chemistry? Maybe they want to go and do what you're doing, work, in nuclear fuel and that type of thing, or maybe different aspects of chemistry. What advice do you have?
Yeah, I would say that, like in any field, it is a human world. And the way that you can learn about chemistry is by interacting with other people interested in chemistry. The number of people who've come to my office and they know they're interested in chemistry, but they might not know the whole world of careers. Guess what, Jade? Not everyone who leaves my lab works on the nuclear fuel cycle. A few of them do at our national labs, but I have several people who work in industry. I have a young man, a former student named Dr. Wade Hinkey, and he loved to make chemical compounds in my lab at big scale, and he now does kilogram scale aluminum chemistry for Procter & Gamble to make personal care products. And it was only by interacting with others and reaching out in the world and communicating that he found the opportunities to embrace for his career, and I've seen that pattern over and over.
That's wonderful advice for your students and any student, and really anybody, right? Just making those connections is huge, keeping your eyes open in whatever field that you are in. One of my favorite questions to ask guests are, what is something that you are really excited about right now? It could be maybe something that happened just in your research. Maybe it's in a news headline you just read. Maybe it's someone you met. What's something you'd like to share?
Yeah. I'm going to come back to that moment when the student comes into my office and is interested in energy and wants to help society in the world. What I am realizing is that collaboration allows us to work on big problems. And in the last couple of years, I've been lucky enough to forge some collaborative projects with folks in Germany, with a very important collaborator of mine near Chicago that works for the Department of Energy. And what I'm seeing is that being brave enough to work on a bigger team allows us to work on even bigger challenges. And say, send my students to different research facilities to work on these big issues. And so I would say, as I'm growing as a scientist, I'm growing into these collaborations that's, I think, going to allow us to work on some pretty big problems like the nuclear fuel cycle.
And you're giving us a glimpse into chemistry and how it's shaping a cleaner and more sustainable future. From the molecules in your lab to students you mentor, your work shows how science can truly make progress. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. This has been an amazing time. Make sure you follow us on the CrimsonChat social medias to keep updated with the phenomenal people and projects happening at the University of Kansas. We'll see you next time.